They said to me, out where the fields thin and the road winds into our village, that you possess a power like no other, that you can mend any illness. For days that rumor settled over us like a persistent mist. It lodged itself in the mouths of neighbors and in the hush of the market until I could not think of anything else. My father is all I have left. This house and those brittle, failing crops are our world. I beg you, I pleaded, save him. I will pay whatever it takes. You listened to my desperate pleas and answered with a certainty I had only dared hope for. You claimed to have a remedy for my father's malady. Yet when I offered to recompense you with whatever means I possessed, you surprised me. Property, you said, I would not accept. My offer hung between us like a traded coin, but you would not take it. Then, in a voice both cold and strange, you advised me to let him go, to accept the inevitable. There was nothing that could be done, you said. For a moment despair returned. I remember the weight of it like a hand on my chest. But then you shifted and made me an impossible proposal. You would cure him, but not for land nor coin. You demanded that I bind myself to you forever, that I enter your service as a servant within the walls of your castle. I recoiled at the idea, but the thought of my father stirring from his fever was a brighter flame than any shame. I clasped my hands and swore then and there that I would do whatever you asked. Anything. You agreed the cure would be given. In return, I would come when you called and live by your rules. We spoke a solemn pact, not written in ink but in desperate promises and the kind of trust that fear so often compels. You told me the medicines and the regimen to follow. You told me to tend him with patience and to watch for certain signs. 3 days, you said, and he would begin to recover. On the 4th day, I must appear at your castle to take up the bargain I had promised. You made it clear. This was a compact I could not break. You gave me your word. I carried your instructions home and followed them without pause. I mixed the bitter herbs and warmed the draughts, murmuring your names as I fed them to my father through the long night. Hope, thin and trembling, returned to the cottage like the first hesitant light at dawn. On the 3rd day, just as you foretold, his breathing evened, color returned to his cheeks. He opened his eyes and recognized me. Relief is a strange, sudden thing. It rushed through me and left me dizzy. I knelt beside his bed and thanked whatever gods there were that you had been true to your words. True to yours as I had been to mine. I journeyed to the castle on the appointed morning. The path that led there rose through sparse woodland and ended where high stone walls cast cool shadows. Entering, I noted at once how different this place was from the village. The air inside the gates tasted of order and quiet servitude. I was led through corridors that smelled faintly of wax and old wood, until at last I reached the servants' wing. The quarters that would be my home were dim and narrow, lit by a small barred window. There was an ache in my chest I could not quite name, part shame, part fear, and part the heavy certainty that my life had shifted on its axis. A servant approached bearing garments folded on his arm. "Excuse me," he said softly, and his gaze flicked to me with something like pity. "I've brought the clothes you need to wear while in service here." I pulled the cloth toward me, expecting a coat, an apron, a plain uniform fit for toil. Instead I stared at garments trimmed with delicate seams and adorned with ribbons and lace, clothes unmistakably intended for a woman's body. Cold flush rose in me. "But these are not butler's livery," I protested. "These are made for women." The attendant's expression hardened fractionally. "They will look beautiful on you," he said, as if that settled the matter. I felt my voice thicken with anger. "I refuse to put them on," I said. The word refuse tasted small and stubborn on my tongue. "It is not a request," he replied. "This is the master's order. Compliance is your welfare." His tone had the gentle cruelty of someone who enforces rules with the calm of long habit. My breath quickened. "He cannot command me to dress as a girl," I said. What I meant was that he had no right to take my dignity along with my freedom. But the man only shook his head. "Don't you understand? By agreeing to serve, you surrendered more than your labor. You belong to him now." Those words struck like a chisel. The reality the castle upheld was not merely that of tasks and schedules. It was an ownership of the self. Around me other faces moved like shadows, people who had surrendered little by little until they were almost carved from the same stone as the corridors. Their eyes held a resignation that made my own rebellions look small and naive. Tears, hot and sudden, blurred my vision. I imagined my father's pale face in the cottage and the promise that had saved him, and the cost that now hung over my head. "Please," I whispered, more to myself than to anyone there. The attendant reached out as if to comfort me, then pulled back as though he feared the master's displeasure more than my sorrow. "If you wish to remain here," he said with the blunt kindness of a man who wished to spare me a longer suffering, "you will obey." His voice contained no malice, only the weary truth of someone who had learned which battles were survivable and which were not. There was no speech left to sway the contract I had sealed, only the choice to submit and survive, or to defy and lose everything we had salvaged. So I stood in that dim room with the women's clothes folded in my hands, the echo of your promise ringing in my memory. I had bargained for life and received it, but with it came a surrender of the freedom my father once had, the freedom I had thought myself entitled to. The castle would keep its word as surely as it took mine. "Don't cry," I told her, voice soft as I fastened the last button. "I'll wear what you've asked. Please dry your eyes." Her lips trembled. She bit them and swallowed back the tears. "If ever I cause you pain, forgive me," I added, earnest and small. She shook her head once and fled the room, shoulders hunched, leaving me standing amid folds of fabric and the echo of her footsteps. I watched the door close and felt a hollow worry bloom in my chest. I told myself she exaggerated, that the man who soothed my father's fever could not be as cruel as rumor painted. He had seemed composed, precise, perhaps austere, but not a tyrant. Yet the image of her retreating silhouette would not leave me. If my father's health demanded I wear a woman's dress, then I would do it without complaint. There was no dignity more pressing than keeping him alive. The garments fit surprisingly well. The dress matched my measurements closely. Its seams hugged my shoulders and waist as if made for me. I found myself staring at the lace and wondering how my reflection would look to a stranger. My hands brushed soft underwear tucked in the folds of a satin apron, an awkward, mortifying discovery. The panties were somewhat snug, but not unwearably so. I adjusted them uneasily and hoped no one would attempt to lift the skirt. The shoes clicked against the floor with a timid confidence. Then came the apron itself, unexpected and oddly domestic, and a tucked slip of pink cloth that definitely was not my size. Perhaps the laundry had been mixed up, I thought, forcing a small, embarrassed laugh. Better a sizing mistake than intention, I told myself. I straightened, accepting this strange new identity for the sake of my father. "I'm ready," I murmured, though my voice quavered. What other customs did this place hold? What other humiliations lay ahead? I couldn't afford another loss of control. Not here, not now. My resolve hardened. I could not let fear rule me again. This must be the last time I faltered. When I entered the hall, a servant bowed and announced me in that flat, practiced tone of the castle. "Do you understand your duties?" a voice asked. "Yes, master," I answered, careful to keep my fear under a veneer of obedience. Moments later, strangers' whispers warmed the hall like a gossiping wind. Someone called out with cruel amusement, "Fresh meat this evening. You don't look very sturdy. You seem weak." The taunt stung, but I kept my head high. Then, without warning, hands struck against flesh. I cried out, disbelief sharper than the pain. "Why did you hit her?" someone demanded, a protest swallowed almost immediately by the authority of the room. The master observed with a cool, impartial air. "Thank you," another voice said, and my heart sank as gratitude mingled with an unsettling obedience. "You've helped me maintain order." Anger flared in me. "You cannot treat your staff this way," I heard myself say, the words tasting of a rebellion I had not intended to perform. Another servant stepped forward like a reed in a storm but was silenced by a look. "You have not yet learned your place in this house," the master replied, voice flat and immovable. "You are under my protection. You will obey." I will not work for someone who abuses people, I insisted. Adrenaline lent my voice brittle courage. Open the door. Let us leave. Release your servants. That plea earned me a mocking smile, a show of false admiration. Such bravery, someone sneered. So brave. I felt my hope contract. Before I could react further, hands moved with quick, decisive force. Stop! I begged, desperation bleeding into panic. The command that followed left no space for resistance. Now you belong to me, the master declared. You will never leave this castle. My world narrowed to concrete and iron. Will I never see my father again? I whispered, terror and pleading braided together. The response was a hard silence broken only by the jangle of metal. Chains appeared as if conjured from the very stone, cold, unyielding, and final. You have no right to do this, I cried. To chain us, to bind and mistreat us. It's cruel. It's unjust. Mockery met my protest. That is what happens to those who meddle, someone said with a cruel lightness, as if cruelty were merely a lesson. I fought, foolish and frantic, tearing at bonds that had more hold than my strength. Are you really going to chain me here? I demanded, voice cracking. No answer came beyond the solid shuffle of boots and the distant clack of obligations being fulfilled. They could not or would not meet my eyes. Please, I begged, sinking to the floor when resistance turned to exhaustion. Let me go. I want to leave. My words sank into the stone as if into the earth itself. They were swallowed and did not return. After that day, the young man never saw his father again. The cottage at the road's bend remained empty of his laughter, its fields left to quiet grief. The castle kept its bargains and collected its debts in human obedience. Life continued there under rules that would not bend for pleas or blood ties. Those who entered its gates wore promises like shackles, and for all the kindness that had once saved a life, the price proved to be